Okay, thanks again for joining us. Here we go for spring tree ID. And I think I labeled this one bursting with blooms. As the sun lasts longer and we linger outside, soaking up the additional warmth, that's what trees are doing. And that's how we're gonna go through this presentation. So the first thing we should do is recap what we've been looking at all winter long, our buds, and they're always really exciting, but they can be really interesting if you look at them. So this is a spice bush, and you can see there's these big round buds on either side, and hopefully you guys can see my pointer. And then right in the middle, tucked in there, is going to be the leaf bud. So on these we have different buds for different parts of the plant. So in this one, we have flower buds that are usually bigger and probably more, they shouldn't be more numerous than leaf buds, but sometimes that happens. And then in the middle, we have these tiny little leaf buds. And that are, in this instance, we have two different types of buds on one plant. Our next one is the American Beech, and these buds are about an inch long and they're covered in scales. They can be really impressive to look at. But when these buds open, we get leaves and flowers that come out of these buds. So this is one bud that's providing everything. And I'll try and mention that as we go through. But I did want to talk about how we have different types of buds on trees as we are out looking at them. And the other thing that we should talk about is gymnosperms. They always get a short rift, and I am bad about reminding myself to talk about them. So here we go. Here are some gymnosperms. And instead of having buds like we saw on our previous slides, they have this thing called a candle, which is this piece in the middle. And that is where the new growth is going to come from. So you have this candle here, and you can see at the side of it, there's this little projection. This is where we're going to see the different cone formation for our gymnosperms. So these are candles, which is where we get all the new growth. And you'll see them as you're wandering around looking at trees. And of course, I didn't like my other picture. So yesterday I was searching for candles on the sides of the road as I'm walking along the Blue Ridge Parkway, and someone's walking toward me. Very odd, didn't expect that. And the person's like, "Of course, it's you on the parkway. Hi, Emily, what are you doing?" And I was like, "Hi, Sue. Yeah, here I am. I'm looking to find some candles on these pine trees. Um, didn't expect to see you out here." And she was searching for morels, and it was just funny because the chances of me bumping into somebody on my way to do a tree presentation apparently is pretty high. So if Sue's out there, it was fun seeing you, and I'll see you again soon. The part that we're going to be looking at on these, so we have the candle again on the end, and then we have the cone formation. So here you can see these little tiny
Hmm.
pieces. Those are going to be the male cones. And then you've got the female cone. This is probably from a year and a half ago, and this is about 2 years ago. So these cones they take a while to develop and come to fruition. And when we are looking at our blooms, we want to know, why are plants bursting into flower? And it's all about reproduction. So reproduction is really important, and there are definitely steps in the reproductive process for our trees, and probably all plants. I shouldn't just be focusing on one, but the first step of reproduction is pollination, and we're going to sort of focus on that tonight. But then there's the germination, so that is the movement of the pollen grain down to actually provide fertilization of the egg. And then we have the fruit formation, and then eventually seed dispersal to create a new plant. So I wanted to sort of outline that all those steps of reproduction, because sometimes we get caught and we don't think about all the pieces that are involved in this process, which is why it was important to mention that. So pollination for gymnosperms, which are our evergreens and our pines, mostly our pines, the transfer of pollen is from a male cone to a female cone. And in my picture of Table Mountain Pine, you can see these tiny, like almost uh, fuchsia colored little pieces here. These are the female cones that are forming on the sides of this candle. And as you can see in this lower picture, it's going to take them several years to create a full-fledged cone that will eventually be able to disperse seeds. And on the other side, we have the male cone. These are going to be longer and have a much shorter lifespan. And they're going to, all they're going to do is dump pollen in the air. And they dump quite a bit of pollen in the air. And the Table Mountain Pine, it you get two cones, 2 to 5 cones per year, and then they take 2 to 5 years to reach maturity, and then about 40% of them open without fire. Most of the time, they need to have fire in order to germinate, and I think that's pretty cool. So our gymnosperms are wind pollinated. Said we were going to talk about pollination today, and pollination is a big deal because we have to get that to happen. So we have to get the pollen that's in this male cone over onto the female cone where this ovule is. And pine trees are really interesting. They actually have female cones on the upper branches and then male cones on the lower branches. So that male pollen has to be caught by the wind and taken up and put onto the female cones on the upper branches of another tree. And this is going to help prevent any self-pollination going on. So this goal is for cross-pollination because we don't want to pollinate ourselves. That's not always good for health-wise. And the pollen is going to be low in protein, low nutrition, which is why wind pollination is the way it's going, because that's light and smooth and easily airborne for movement. And I have a word at the bottom of this slide, abiotic, and that means not biological. So wind is not a living thing that is moving pollen from one place to another. And almost all abiotic pollination is going to be wind pollination. So I thought that was an important piece to put in there. One of the interesting things, I take lots of classes because I really want to learn more about plants all the time because that's the way I roll. Our pine cones, the female pine cone will release a pollination drop that will sit on the top of where the ovule is for pollination, and it'll have a sticky surface. So that liquid drop on the female cone is going to catch that male pollen that is being dispersed all over the place, rehydrate that pollen, and then pull it back in for fertilization in the ovule. And how cool is that? Like, I'm not even smart enough to tie my shoes all the time. But these female cones know that they have to have a receptor out there in order to catch the pollen and then bring it in so that we have pollination happening. And it should be noted that some pine species have a sticky surface on the opening of their ovule that's almost like a stigma on a flower. So instead of having that pollination drop, they'll have a sticky surface at the top, which will allow that pollen to get stuck and then eventually get moved in. And I think that's really cool. That's one of the things I learned between last time I presented this and this time. So we're going to sort of focus on angiosperms, the flowering trees. I know that pines don't always get a lot of attention, but I gave them some today. So here we're going to go into angiosperms, and these are flowering trees. And what we have to start off with is the typical flower. And I like to think of flowers as in whorls, which is a complete circle. And sometimes that circle leads to another circle. So think of it as a spiral. And once you go one complete turn, you'll have another complete turn. So on a typical flower, the outermost whorl, and these are all modified leaves that are creating these whorls. So the outermost modified leaf is going to be the sepal at the end of the stem. And then the next whorl inside of that are going to be the petals. And then the whorl inside of that, we're going to start dealing with reproductive pieces. And usually it's the male reproductive parts in that next whorl. And those are going to be the filament, which is this long, thin line here, and then the anther on the end, which is going to contain the pollen. Together, those are called the stamen. And we remember that they're men because they have men at the end, or they're masculine because they have men at the end of that word. And then in the very center, that last whorl is going to be the female part of the flower. And it starts with a stigma on top, a style down the middle, and then an ovary with ovules inside. And all those three pieces, the stigma, style, and ovary together are called the pistil. And all women have style. So that's how you're going to remember that the pistil is is going to be the female piece. So we're going to be playing around with these pieces because this is a typical flower. And a lot of the flowers that we're going to be looking at and talking about on our trees are not going to be as good at being typical and having all of these pieces. And here we go with flower terminology. So I have a tulip tree flower here on this picture, and this is a perfect flower because it has both male and female parts. So you can see these are the anthers around here. And in the center here, we're going to have what is going to be the compound pistil. This is also considered a complete flower because it has sepals on the outside, petals going around, and then we have male and female parts. So this is also a complete flower. We're going to have flowers that are imperfect or unisexual because they only have one part of the reproductive process or the other. And I've made a diagram for that, and hopefully this isn't going to be too hard or too crazy. But here we are, we have flowers. And as you go down the line, you can have perfect flowers. So they have male and female parts. And those plants are going to have something that looks like this. So we have the male part, we have the anther here, or we have the filament here with the anther on top, and together those are called the stamen. And the number that we have in there are all stamen collectively. And then in the middle, we're going to have this ovary with an ovule in the middle, style here, and stigma on top. So all the pieces are together, so it's a hermaphroditic. Some people say it's a bisexual flower. And those are what make up 80% of our plants. And I have Cyonesis and Monoecious here, and I'm going to put a pin in that for a minute and go to the other side. So imperfect flowers have male or female parts, and I have a staminate flower here. So this is only going to have male pieces. So we have the filaments and the anthers where the pollen would be, and we are missing the female part in the middle. And then a pistillate flower is going to be the opposite of that. So we're going to have the female piece, but we're going to be missing those stamen pieces. And plants divide out into two categories for this. The dioecious, which is plants that are separate. So there's a male plant and a female plant, and you only find male flowers on the male plant, and you only find female flowers on the female plant. And then there's monoecious here, and there's only 5% of those, which is interesting because I used to think that monoecious meant has both sexes on a plant, but this actually means that it has both pistillate and staminate flowers on the same tree. So they are not perfect flowers or hermaphroditic or bisexual flowers. And I recently took a course where that is what the meaning of monoecious means, and I didn't know that. Which then means that we have an unknown word that we should be using for something like that tulip flower that we just saw, because it has both male and female parts all in the same flower. Someone suggested the word is Cyanesis, and I have previously heard it, you heard monoecious, so jury is still out on what the word should be, but flowers contain both male and female structures. And if anybody in this meeting or in this lecture or talk tonight knows what that word should be, I would absolutely invite you to put in the chat so that I can research it later. But it was a jaw-dropping moment for me when cherries, peas, and magnolias are not considered monoecious because they are hermaphroditic flowers with both male and female parts. So my own new surprise. So we just talked about monoecious and dioecious plants. Monoecious has both male and female on the same plant. So here I have a black birch. These are all of our male flowers in this catkin, or a ment, is what they're called. And they are hanging down. And then the female flowers are in these little catkins that are pointing upwards. And that's very typical that the female catkins are pointed up and are smaller and more compact, and the male catkins hang down. So this would be a monoecious plant because it has separate male and female flowers on the same plant. Over here, we have a dioecious plant. This is red maple. And you can see all of the anthers with pollen hanging out all over the place on these male staminate flowers. And then over here, you can see this bivalve or two-pronged stigma that is on these female red maple flowers. And they're absolutely gorgeous. And out of that stigma, eventually you get the two winged samaras coming out. So it sort of is a precursor to letting you know that you have you'll have two seeds created and two ovaries. Okay. We're going to move on. So the next thing we should look at is flower structure. We can have regular or radial flower symmetry, which is like this cherry flower here. It's a general cherry. I'm not sure which one. And then we have irregular or zygomorphic or bilateral flower symmetry over here, which is what this red bud is. So it's really important as flowers evolutionarily evolve, flower structures go from a lot, like we saw the magnolia, to reduced. And as it gets more evolutionary advanced, it gets more specialized. And when you get to bilateral flowers, you will often think of an orchid flower as a bilateral flower. And that's a very advanced type of flower. And hopefully that makes a little sense. So bursting with blooms, again, why do we have these, why do plants burst into flower at the beginning of the season? We earlier talked about this pollination and the reproductive process. Pollination is a transfer of pollen from stamen to stigma in flowering plants. Germination, I mentioned, is the tube that develops to carry the pollen from the stigma down the style and into the ovule of the plant. Fertilization is when the pollen unites with the ovule to form a seed. Fruit formation is the ovary enlarging to form a fruit that may contain one or more seeds. And then seed dispersal is fruit that is carried away from the parent by wind, animal, or expulsion. We won't talk about that today, but there is something that flings its seeds. So pollination, angiosperms can use abiotic or biotic means of transfer. And we talked earlier that abiotic means that it's not biological, so it's not alive. So biotic means it is alive. And for this one, are these flowers using a biotic or an are these flowers using biotic or abiotic means for pollination? And I'd love to see what your thoughts are in the chat. You guys are shy. Yes. Okay, we're on the right track. And luckily there's some insects on this tree, so you can see that biotic, so there's biological means of movement. So we have the bee here, and I think that's a beetle over in that corner. So yes, excellent. So more people are chiming in. That's fantastic. Abiotic, oh gosh. That's funny, but love the puns. So pollination, we have the transfer from stamen to anther. There are different types of pollination. There's self-pollination within the same flower, and there's self-pollination within a different flower, but on the same plant. And then there's cross-pollination. And it's really important for plants to do cross-pollination. Why do you guys think that? And I had a friend today do his meiosis dance for me. So here's meiosis. I have my single cell. I add, I double my chromosome number, and then I have a cross, and then I have 4 cells at the end. And it's that cross. So we want to make sure there's genetic changes in our species by having that cross pollination happen. Because if I am making a replica of myself every single time, there's a chance that I could be wiped out by one bug or one fungus or one unknown thing. So having that cross pollination makes sure the genetics are all mixed up and allows different species to have some resistance to different things if there are any new things on the horizon that are attacking plants. And there's always things attacking plants. So it's important that they have this cross-pollination going on. If you're self-pollinating, sometimes you want to do that because you haven't seen an insect and or your pollen hasn't been moved, and you want to make sure that you produce a seed. And that's definitely okay, and that makes sense. So it's not bad to do self-pollination, but you probably want to have some genetic diversity happening at some point along the way. And what are the things that plants do to have self-pollination prevention? I feel like I'm in a sex ed class. So physical distance is really important. This is where the girls stand on one side of the room and the boys stand on the other side of the room at a dance, and they don't get close to each other. So imperfect flowers, as I previously mentioned, can be in separate places on the same tree, which is a monoecious plant, or they can be on absolutely separate trees in different places. So that's really important. Placement of anthers versus stigma. On my Pinkster azalea here, you can see that my stigma is extending way out here, and my anthers are much closer in here. So my stigma should not get any of my pollen from my own plant flower or my own flower on it. And that's really important. The other thing is the separation by timing. So when the pollen is released versus when the stigma is receptive. So if I am a pine tree and I'm shaking all my pine pollen in the wind for it to go across, it's really good if the female cones on my tree are not ready to receive pollen and they're closed tight. So those are that's a really good example of how we have pollen release versus stigma receptiveness. Evolutionarily, it's thought that the magnolias were the oldest of all flowering plants, and they are the ancestor to all flowering plants. So, so they actually think that all monocots and dicots arose from the magnolias. Evolutionarily, I think in paleobotany, they talk about the flower arising like 2 or 3 times, whereas the leaf arises like 7 different times in different places. But when the magnolia was first around, millions of years ago. I think it's millions. There were only beetles for pollination. We did not have a lot of insect diversity at that
Hmm.
time. So that's why our magnolias are so big. They're big and bowl shaped so that they can like have a beetle land in them, walk around, move things where they need to go, and then move to another flower and do the same thing. Um, and because this flower is evolutionarily one of the oldest, it has many, many of everything. So there's lots of petals on this flower. There's lots of anthers and filaments on this flower, and there's tons of pistils all together. So when you think of plants and when they went from wind pollination um, in the pine category, and then we moved to flowering plants. One of our first flowering plants is the magnolia, and that was using the beetle for pollination. And there are lots of things, biotic pollinators. You can have bees and wasps, butterflies, moths, flies, beetles, hummingbirds, because we don't have to always be an insect, ants, bats, small reptiles and mammals. And last year, the first amphibian was found pollinating. Totally crazy. Not here in the United States, but it's still worth mentioning. And there's flower adoptions that have been done for those pollinators. So color, if your color is um, a yellow, you're going to be getting bees. If your color is red, you're going to get hummingbirds. If your color is maroon and you smell like rotting flesh, you're going to get flies and beetles. Some flowers are oriented to have different things happen. There could be landing pads on your flower. Some flowers are not open during the day, but open at night. So that means they're moth pollinated. And then the flower symmetry, if it's radial versus bilateral, can also be an adaptation for a pollinator. But the funny thing is, with all of those pollinators out there, and we, have created our magnolia flower, for some reason, a lot of the trees still thought it was advantageous to be using wind pollination. So even though our magnolia was our first flower, we had a lot of plants decide, these insects are not cutting it the way that I want them to, and they sort of swoop back into having modified flower parts in order to be wind pollinated. So these are going to be trees that are releasing pollen in the wind and hoping that female flowers catch that pollen and finish off the pollination process. And here are several of those species. Um, Maples as some, because sometimes I do see some insects on them, but I do not believe that they rely on them completely. So I've talked a lot about other stuff, so I should really get into tree ID because you guys might be getting tired. So let's start this. And I decided for tree ID, I wanted to think about distribution of plants across the landscape. And when I started doing my distribution of plants, we have the coastal plain, we have the Piedmont, we have the Blue Ridge, Valley and Ridge, and Appalachian. So um, I'm going to throw in a couple of coastal plain species, and then I'm going to be focusing mostly on the Piedmont and the Blue Ridge because that's where Charlottesville is, and this is the Charlottesville area tree stewards. So I'll go from Piedmont into Blue Ridge because I think that's important. So while we're on the coastal plain, we should be looking
Hmm.
for sweet gum. And this is sweet gum. And as you can see, this is a monoecious plant. We have male, this one is actually different from a lot of the ones that we've looked at previously. These are male balls of anther flowers. Or I guess they're staminate flowers up here on a raceme. And then hanging down are where our female flowers are. And you can see in this close-up picture that these are all of the style stigmas at the top of the style, and they are open and receptive to pollen. And I think that's super cool. And as you can see, out of this plant, you have both male and female coming out at the same time as leaves. So when bud break happens for this plant, you have male, female, and leaves all coming out at the same time and drifting in different directions. And of course, for those that may not be familiar with what we're looking at on the screen right here, these are the ones that create that really lovely capsule. It's actually a compound of capsules that can be a little bit hard when you step on them. So, and I used to roller skate on the ones that there were street trees where I used to live in Northern Virginia. And I would slide down the bus stop on all of the sweet gum capsules to get to the bus on time. In the horticultural trade, they have made a fruitless variety for landscaping so that you don't have to deal with this capsule and hurt your feet. So it's an option now. The other one that's going to be in the coastal plain area is going to be the American holly. It's starting to make its way into the Piedmont and further in because it is the berries are being moved by the bird population because they're moving inland some themselves. And this one is going to be dioecious, which means we have two separate trees, one with female flowers, and that is the one on the right, and one with male reproductive parts that are functioning, and that's on the left. So you can see there's nothing there where the pistil should be on the male flowers, and all you can see are these anthers with pollen that looks like it's being shaken out. And on the other side, you see these filaments with these white pieces on the top. So some would say those are not fully developed. So you can have non-functioning flower parts. So these are non-functioning stamen. And then in the middle, we have the pistil that is functioning for these female flowers. And of course, if you are a holly at winter, you want one with berries. The red berries are often used for winter decorations during Christmas and those winter holidays. So if you have a male tree in your yard, you're never going to get berries. You need to have a female tree to have the berries. For those that were shaking their fist at their male holly tree for never producing berries, it's not its fault. So be gentle. Now I want to do something that may or may not work. So here's my drawing. It looks a little cartoonish, but that's fine. I'm going to start in a riverine water area, and I'm going to head off into upland reaches and go to the top of the mountains. So that's the order of my plants and how we will look at them for ID. And so I did this because I wanted to see if I could do this. And if you think I have something in the wrong place, please let me know. And I know there's some generalists that like to pop up in lots of places. So I put a generalist list at the back. So here we go. Near water with moist soils. First up are elms, because these are the things that come out immediately, and they come out so early that I often do not see the flowers because I don't know. The flowers, by the time I look at them, they're already germinating or they're already creating seed, and I have missed pollination, germination, and fertilization. So because that happens to me, it might happen to you. So here are the American elm. The American elm samaras often have hairs on them, and they're usually they're not completely circular, they're more oblong, and they have a notch at the bottom that's sort of open. It almost looks like a parrotfish with the overbite that's going along and eating the coral. So that's the American elm. And then next to it is the slippery elm. And this one, the Samara is almost completely all around, and there is nowhere near as much hair on that Samara. This is a really good way to tell
Hmm.
these species apart. When I am in the field, I'm often asked, is this a slippery elm or is this an American elm? You can do it by buds, but it's pretty tough. And when you try to do it by leaves, the leaves are too variable. So I really like to ID my elms by the seeds that they produce. In this case, there's Samaras. Next up is the American sycamore. This is also going to be something that we find in a wet area like stream banks and rich bottomlands. And this is the bud break that looks like it is pushing out all sorts of leaves. And within those leaves, you can see over here, we're starting to get the female reproductive piece that's hanging out there. And I think that these might be complete flowers. I don't think they're separate male and female. So this isn't considered monoecious, even though everything's there on the same plant, on the same tree, in the same flower structure. So very cool. Oh, and I didn't italicize Plantus occidentalis. Shame on me. Our next one is cottonwood. I love this tree, and I know there's not a lot of it, but still, it is going to be on river borders and floodplains where it's moist. And this is in the populus family, so this is related to aspens, and they have these enormous buds, and these are all the male catkins of flowers hanging down. And I'm actually not sure where the female flowers are. Unfortunately, this tree is a lot taller than me, so I have to use a zoom to get the flowers, but they were absolutely stunning as they were shaking in the wind as I went by. And then I put the leaf next to it so you could see that it's deltoides because the leaf looks like a triangle with the with some serrations on the end. Still in the water stream edges area, we have the hazel or the smooth alder, and these are the female flowers over here. They almost look like uh, bottle brushes. I guess that's a good way to. And these are all that these little hairs that you see coming out on either side of these. Those are the stigma that are just hanging out, looking to catch that pollen. And then over here, we have all the pollen on these catkins that are hanging down, and they're just shaking in the wind and dusting everything. And this is one of the first ones I usually see each year. So first it's elm, then I see the hazel catkins starting to expand, and I start getting excited because it must be spring, and that's for me, that's my favorite time of year because all the plants are opening and rejuvenating and getting going again. So while we're still in that riverine area, the river birch is going to be there. This is the female pistillate female flowers over here on this catkin heading up. And then you can see these dangling catkins. Those are going to be all the male flowers. And this is the one that's going to have the shreddy bark on it that's got a little bit of a salmony color. You can still see some lenticel lines on that bark, but I think it looks more like a watercolor because they're kind of blurry. Beautiful tree and definitely great to find this time of year with those catkins on it. While we're down by the water, here is box elder. This is our maple that has a compound leaf, which is really cool, I think. And this tree is going to be dioecious. So we have male pedicels here, these long drooping pieces, as these long drooping stems are called pedicels. And at the end of them, we're going to have the male anthers that are going to be releasing pollen. And out of the flower or out of the bud on the plant, we get leaves as well as flowers all happening at the same time. I think this is gorgeous. In floodplains, we might see these two. And from a distance, they can look a lot alike, but my sassafras is going to have the flowers at the tips of the branches and not on the actual
Hmm.
twigs going down. Whereas my sassafras, you can see clusters of flowers all the way along all of these pieces going up and down. And then closer in, the sassafras has a complete or perfect flower. You can see we've got petals out here. You can see the anthers over here. And in the middle, we're going to have the stigma and style and ovary. And then over here, the northern spice bush, this has separate male and separate female flowers. Sometimes they are on separate plants and sometimes they can be on the same tree. We have to remember that when we're looking at anything around us, that we're catching them as a capture of a snapshot in time of where they are evolutionarily. So some plants are going towards being monoecious, having or going towards having everything on one plant in one flower, and other plants might be separating things out, having one different flowers on the same plant or different flowers on different trees. So, and it gets to be, I know people that get cranky about the fact that they want to go and get a female spice bush because that's what they want, because they want the red berries for birds that are migrating in the fall. And sometimes the seller is saying, well, all of these are, they're monoecious. They have both male and female in the same plant. Like, what are you asking for? So we have some things to figure out still as we go along in our native plant plantings. This is the pawpaw. This has also got male versus female trees. So this is dioecious. And these are just adorable. I absolutely love these plants. And they don't actually have a true bud on the end. It's just two leaves that are folded together, huddling through winter, and they're kind of cold. And you can see the flowers when they're open are maroon colored. And I think you'll remember I said if a flower is maroon colored, it usually means that it's pollinated by flies or beetles because it smells bad. And quick side story, when I was learning about plants and I found I had to do this boring catalog thing and they wanted me to look at all these things, and there was a star cactus that flowered once every couple of years, and the flower opened and smelled like rotting flesh, and I wanted to give that as housewarming gifts to all my friends that were purchasing property and getting married. So I never did it, but I really thought it'd be fun to do and see what happened when it actually flowered. um, I'm much nicer than that now. I've done a lot of work on myself. This is the hackberry, and this is one that is monoecious as well. So we have male flowers over here with anthers that are receptive, and over here you can see these really cool fuzzy looking stigma that are open and receptive to pollen. And they have these cool leaves that are usually have oblique angles. They don't match from one side to the other. And if you don't have any of that, you can always identify it by the bark because it gets these warty knobs on it that eventually join and create these long ridges that are really hard. Very cool tree. Um, we're also going to see in these bottom moist areas the green ash. Here are some male flowers over here. And then these are for the female flowers, which I was driving along and I was like, there's something going on with that tree. Of course, I had to pull over and back up and take a look. And I saw all these beautiful female flowers on this green ash. And as they get older, and they're pollinated, they start spreading out in order to make those samaras that you see on the green ash. So I was very excited to see this and then you can see, so flowering has finished and we're starting to get the compound leaf coming out at the end of this branch. So I thought that was fabulous. And here is the silver maple. This is going to have just tons and tons of flowers all together on the ends of the branches. Just goes wild. And it is one of those maples that has separate male and female. And again, sometimes our maples, they have separate male and female, and then sometimes they have them all in the same plant too. So, and if you don't see the flowers, the leaves are going to start to come out, and these are highly dissected leaves, and they're very, very pretty. And the underside of them is silver, which is why this is a silver maple. This is, again, something you should see on stream banks and in floodplains as you're driving around. Here's the American hornbeam. This is our beautiful female flower that's going to be at the very end of the branch. And then behind it, on these catkins coming down, are going to be all these anthers and these staminate flowers that are under these bracts. So these are definitely imperfect flowers, and they're not complete because they don't have petals or sepals. They are absolutely just to dump out pollen so that these female stigmas that are hanging out can catch that pollen. And these catkins are not pre-formed in the winter. So when you are looking at a musclewood, and I was going to put the muscle sinewy bark on the side, but I forgot to do that. In the winter, you won't see any catkins hanging down off this tree. In the well-drained floodplain, we're going to go to Australia. This is the hop hornbeam, and I actually did remember to put the bark in this one. And the female flowers are going to be coming out of this piece on the end. I was on the very edge of the parkway, ready to tumble off as I was trying to get these pictures yesterday. So I couldn't quite find that female flower, but these beautiful catkins were just all swinging in the breeze, and they looked gorgeous, and very exciting to see them. And this one, the Australia, actually has catkins that are preformed, so they are hanging on the tree all through winter. And this likes, as we just saw, we want to be in moist, well-drained areas for this plant. Here's the black walnut. Got this picture this weekend. I was really excited because the leaves are just about to come out, and these catkins are starting to roll down. And then this is what it looks like when it's completely out. Absolutely gorgeous, deep, well-drained soils for this one. Beautiful tree, and really cool staminate flowers. And all those black pieces are all anthers that are dumping pollen. So, and we had a really exceptional year of black walnuts last year. So maybe that they will have just as many this year. Here's the American beech. It has these beautiful, almost bird of paradise looking buds that extend and elongate. And then they have these round clusters of male flowers. And then the female flower is usually right tucked in at the end over here. Absolutely gorgeous. Yeah, I spent some time today looking for another one to update this picture, but I was like, I didn't see anything that was actually in flower yet. So maybe my branches were too young. And then we have the tulip tree. Usually we have leaves that origami and come out first, and then we have flowers. They'll be later in May when we see those flowers. And then redbud as another gorgeous plant. And now we've moved to bilateral symmetry. And the neat part about it is there's an insect right here. These redbud flowers, all of the pea flowers, they have a banner on top, and then they have wings, and then they have this keel on the bottom. And what happens is the insect lands on the keel, which weighs it down, and out pops the male and female parts of the flower to rub pollen on their underside, and then go to the next flower, and that pollen gets transferred to the stigma of the next flower. Very cool. And I was circling the redbud around my house the other day, trying to get some pollinators in that, and it was lots of fun, but took me a lot of time. The other thing is these flowers, they look like little hummingbirds. So this would be the hummingbird beak and
Mm.
then head, and
Huh.
here are the wings. So you can eat those flowers, put them on your salad as a topper, and they can be pretty, they can add a nice color to your salad. And I've heard you can also eat the pea pods that show up as long as they're green at the very beginning of the season. Redbud's a great plant. But it drops out of the understory once you get to about 3,000 feet. So don't plant this on the top of the Blue Ridge because it's not going to do very well up there. Cool shady slopes. So here are the heaths. And these are all understory, so or actually the sourwood isn't, it's a lot taller. But we have the pinkster azalea that I talked about previously, that's got the separation of anthers from stigma. We've got the sourwood that has these little urn-shaped flowers on it. I think this is fruit here. We've got the rhododendron here, also trying to keep allow for separation of anthers and stigmas, so they're pollen and stigmas. And then we have the mountain laurel here, and the mountain laurel, they're not sure what pollinates the mountain laurel. And as that flower opens, all those anthers are pulled back into those little spots on the flower cup, and it is really cool.
Hmm.
So the actual pollen is catapulted out of the flower for dispersing of the pollen. So is that abiotic or biotic? And I can't wait to see your answers. So remember when we talked about wind pollination, it was abiotic, and the A in the front means that it's not alive, because biotic means live, and then the A prevents it from being alive. So in this case, I would say it's going to be abiotic because this is a catapult. So there's no insect that touches this flower when it decides to catapult out that pollen. And that pollen can reach max speeds of 8 miles per hour, which is wild. Okay, I should keep going. Um, and we don't need to see it again. As we're on those cool, shady slopes, you start to get into the mountains and you'll see the striped maple. And here are the stripes on the maple, the black, green, and white on the stripes of the bark of the maple tree. This produces leaves and flowers at the same time out of one bud. They're just starting to open up right now. They're absolutely phenomenal and they're really pretty. Um, and this is a dioecious plant, so it has male versus female plants, but the majority of them are male. And they're male because it's not hard to produce pollen. It takes less energy to produce pollen. So for the majority of their lives, these majority male plants are just throwing pollen in the wind. But if they are getting older and they're concerned about their health, they will change sex and become female so that they know that they are producing seed before they die. And they can do that sex change 3 weeks prior to flowering, which is really amazingly fast. So, because being a female tree takes more energy to create, um, you're creating an ovary, you're creating seed after that, you've got to get that dispersed. They're on samaras, blah, blah, blah. That takes a lot of work. So, for the most times, these striped maples are just guys. And then as they get older and they get worried about uh, their fitness and being able to continue on, they will swap over and become females and make sure that they produce viable seeds. Very cool. They also have this duck shaped foot, this leaf that looks like a duck foot, but you still see the 3 points on that, which remind us all that it's a maple. Another one that we're going to see as we're going up the mountain on moist slopes in the understory is going to be the serviceberry. We have it over here at a distance, and then we've got it getting closer, and then right here, you can see it close up. And I think, okay, we're going to try something. Let's see if we can do this. I think I can zoom in on that and make it bigger. I hope that happened for you. And this flower is very cool because it's almost like a cup, and all the petals and anthers are on the edge of the cup. And then in the very center, in the middle of the cup, is where the pistil comes out. And that's how they separate the pieces and make sure that male and female are not getting too close to one another. And now I will expand this again. Whoops, go back a slide so that we have the whole slide in the picture. I don't know how well that worked, but I'll take a look at the recording later and see. The next one is going to be the sweet or black birch. And again, we talked about birches earlier. They have these catkins male pieces hanging down. They're also called immense. And then we have the female staminate flower, or sorry, epistolate flowers that are headed up. And our black birch is where we're going to start seeing those lenticle lines, and we're going to be able to identify that tree by the bark if we haven't seen that already. Cucumber magnolia, this is going to be another one that's in the mountains. This is the most cold hardy of the magnolias. It has these beautiful leaves and then this beautiful green to cream colored flower. Again, this is going to be beetle and fly pollinated. And this cucumber magnolia, when you are looking at ornamental magnolias, especially if you're going further north than here, it's often put on the rootstock of a cucumber magnolia because it's more cold hardy and it can handle higher, colder temperatures further north. Kind of a cool thing. Here's a sugar maple. Sugar maples are kind of crazy because they have all these pedestals coming down. And then you can see this one here has these long pieces. Here's another one with these long pieces. Those are the stigma that are open and receptive for pollen. And then these guys here are pollen hanging out on these. So these are going to be the male flowers, and these are the female flowers here. So you get a mixture of them on the sugar maple. And I was visiting a friend this morning, and I looked out his window and he's like, I don't know what's wrong with my maple. I was like, nothing's wrong with it. It's starting to flower. And I can see male flowers and female flowers from here. He's like, there's no way you can see that. And I was like, all right, I'll see you later. But I had to say, I've been looking at flowers a lot recently, so of course I know what they look like. Here's the black cherry. This is going to be very much like the serviceberry because it's in the same family. So you can see we have this floral cup that goes all the way around where our petals and our stigma or stamen are attached to. And in the very center, you'll see our pistil right in there. And these are on racemes of flowers. They're really pretty. They're probably going to be a couple more months before we see them. And then we have our hickories. Our hickories can kind of come in from the bitternut at the very bottom in our floodplains, all the way to our shagbark that's going to be on the top of the mountains. So I wasn't really sure where to put these pictures. I think I have pignut on this side, and this one's shagbark over here. So we had a little bit of a mishmash of hickories. And then we have our oaks. This is a white oak over here. And we have female flowers in these axils here. And then these are the male catkins hanging down on our oaks. So, and they're going to be on those well-drained slopes all the way up. And our mountain ridge will probably be dominated by hickories and oaks. Our fringe tree is going to be on our overlooks. And this is going to have lots of flowers hanging down underneath it. This is in the same family as the ash, but it's at the very top, and it's going to have some beautiful smells coming up soon. And here are some generalists. This is the red maple. This has separate male and female trees. And right now you can go out and identify which are male and which are female very easily, because our males are putting out the leaves, and our females already have samaras and the leaves are just starting to come out. So if you want to go and impress your friends, you can take a look outside and tell them which is your red maple male versus your red maple female. And I always think that's fun. Then we have the flowering dogwood. This is another generalist, and this is a compound or a composite flower. So we have bracts over here that are floral, that are not part of the flowers, and then we have flowers in the center that have petals and anthers, and then a stigma in the middle. So I think they're really cool because they are probably the most like we have asters as the most complicated flower in the dicots. This would be the most complicated flowering tree because it has the same sort of idea as many flowers bunched together with specialized parts all around them. Here's the black locust, and this is the last generalist I'll show you. And these flowers are going to be just like the red bud flowers, with the banner on top, the wings on the side, and the keel underneath. And in here you can even see there's a moth hiding in those locust flowers. Very pretty. And that takes us to the end. So here are my references. And finally, here is my slide to see if you guys have any questions. And I'm going to stop sharing. Before I stop sharing, this is a bladder nut and it's in flower. I found it today. I was so excited. Yes, I definitely get excited about little things. So I'm going to stop sharing and look forward to seeing you guys and seeing if you have any questions for me. You can put this question in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and give me your question.